This episode of Fandom Power contains a significant amount of background noise. We'd like to consider that a growing pain, and we thank you for your continued support of the show.
Welcome to Fandom Power.
Welcome to Fandom Power, the show where we talk about all things fandom and their influence on us culturally and, more important, personally. I'm your host, Wes Arscott, and today we're going to talk about the galaxy far, far away. That's right, we're talking Star Wars. And just before we get started, I just want to let you know that it was a really difficult decision trying to come up with a topic for this episode. I mean, there are so many great pieces of fandom out there that I'm really attached to, and it was a very tough decision between Star Wars or Transformers. So we're going to go with Star Wars. Before we kick off the conversation, though, I want to just introduce the rest of the panel that's here with me tonight, here in the studio. My recording partner, Scott Elder.
Hello.
And our engineer and producer, Andrew Daw.
Good evening.
Our good friend and farmer, Henry Backer.
Hello.
And joining us remotely from Toronto, Ontario, Eric Swenson.
Hey, hey.
And all the way up in the valley from Petawawa, Jason Burgoyne.
Groovy.
And the furthest one away tonight, my very dear friend from high school, Hank McLaughlin, all the way from Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Ahoy, hoy.
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you so much for wanting to come and do this with me. I am so excited to be doing this, and I cannot thank you all enough. We're going to talk Star Wars tonight, and I know that each of us has our own individual connections to it. And I just want to kick off the conversation by asking everybody in turn, what is your earliest memories of Star Wars? So, in no particular order, anybody want to go first?
I remember my dad finishing work on a Friday night and running upstairs and grabbing me, and we ran down the main street of Fenelon Falls and went and saw Empire at the Fenelon Falls movie theater.
So that would have been 1980.
Yeah.
Wow.
So 5.
It's funny that you say that too, because 1980 is actually my first memories of Star Wars as well, but I was still living in Alberta at the time, and I don't think I'd seen, actually I can't even remember seeing a movie in a theater until a few years later. Like Return of the Jedi was actually the first one that I saw in theater, and it was a drive-in, but I can remember watching A New Hope when it was still just called Star Wars on VHS back in 1980. Yeah, VHS. And then shortly after that, it went on to like Super Channel, and my parents, made enough money that they could afford to subscribe. And so the month or two that it was on Super Channel, I think I watched it 17, 20, 40 times.
I think that was the first movie to actually air on Canadian pay TV.
Really? I didn't know that.
I believe that's the truth.
What about you guys?
I remember going to see the very first one in the theaters. I loved it, obviously, right from the get-go, but I think my strongest memory, and this is just a retrospect memory, so it's nothing that I experienced at the time, but many years later, I now realize the significance of it. I remember in 1983 coming out of the movie theater, having just watched Return of the Jedi, and looking back at it, it's culturally significant that I remember being shocked out of my mind that Darth Vader was their father.
No!
Whereas it's so imprinted on our culture. Now, everybody knows it's even iconic to hear James Earl Jones, Luke, I am your father.
Yeah.
Everybody knows he's his father now, but I remember very specifically everybody being shocked that was a huge movie twist at the time.
Yeah, it really was.
I mean, his name is Vader. Vader means father. It's German.
That's not what it's from. It's from Invader.
Oh, see, I never would have picked up on either of those cues, to be honest.
Sorry, I just want to thank you all because I feel real young today. I was not alive when these movies came out, so this is really just the ego boost I needed.
Okay, well, when I was 5 years old, my dad took me to a drive-in movie, 1977, and I remember him telling me, or I learned somehow, that the two movies that we saw were Tornado Alley and Star Wars, and Star Wars was second. But my first memory, like actual memory that I have of anything that I know that was mine and that nobody told me about, was driving down the road and watching the medal ceremony disappear into the distance. Because my dad left early.
Oh, no.
And I was sitting in the back window. And so, I don't know, it just made such a huge, I mean, I remember the movie, but I don't, like, what I remember is driving away, like, long, going, oh my God. And then, as I sort of got older and there was more coming, it added to that sort of excitement. Yeah, that's like my first actual memory, and it's a Star Wars memory.
That almost makes it more cinematic.
Well, it was definitely fading into the distance, and still very vivid in my head.
It's funny that two of us actually, remember Star Wars because of a drive-in movie theater.
But yeah, that's pretty
small
cool.
town.
Yeah. What about the rest of you guys? Henry, Andy?
I came to it a little less directly than just being taken to see the movies. I think it must have been about 78, 79, because I was about 5 or 6 years old, and my parents got me the X-Wing for Christmas.
The Kenner, the
the original
cool.
X-Wing ship.
Yeah.
As a present. They thought that I would think it was cool, and I very much did. And I think they thought it came with a pilot figure, because I'm sure there was one in the picture on the box, right?
Yeah.
And it didn't. And they were like, oh, well, you need a little man to fly your spaceship. So let's, I think it must have been Boxing Day or something. We went to Woco or wherever it was, and there were all the Star Wars figures. And I had no context at all for any of this, because I didn't have an older brother or siblings or anything like that. And my parents certainly just didn't know what it was beyond something that I would probably like. And so there were the figures, and I picked out the Death Star droid to take home to fly my X-Wing, because I had no context, but I liked the robot.
Yeah.
And so when we went back to school, I brought my new little figure to school to show my buddies.
Yeah. And
all of a sudden, all of this information started coming at me about, oh, that's the Death Star droid, and he's in the Sandcrawler, and it's into this and that and that, and there's he's the Death Star, and I was like, well, what is all this stuff?
Yeah.
And they'd either been to see it or their older siblings had put them onto it.
Right.
So my first experience of the Star Wars story was basically like an oral narrative where everybody started to fill me in on what I didn't know anything about.
Yeah.
And from there, it was like, next stop was at the library to pick up, I think it must have been shortly thereafter. Maybe it was 80 years. Yeah, it must have been right around then, because I remember very specifically getting the Empire Strikes Back picture book out of the library. And that's how I found out that story, was by
fantastic,
reading the picture book. And I didn't actually see a movie until, and this is another vivid memory, is I was in bed, and it was late at night for me.
Yeah.
And then my mom came and got me out of bed, which was a huge deal, because that never happened for anything. Yeah. And New Hope was on television.
Right.
And she was like, well, it's a weekend, whatever, come on, watch this. And
so that would have been in its actual broadcast run then.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, we didn't have cable.
Right.
We lived in the country.
Yeah.
And so that was how I first saw New Hope. And then,
fantastic.
Like you, I think it was Jedi was the first one I actually ever got to see in the theater.
Yeah.
On my 10th birthday. So,
Andy, what do you think?
My earliest recollection of it would be the Ewok adventure film.
Really?
Oh, wow.
And I remember it because I was allowed to record it.
Oh, so you with a VCR?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, no PVRs back then.
What are the chances you still have that kicking around?
0. 0% chance for that.
When I was putting the notes together for the show, I actually went looking for it, and it's not easy to find a legal, easily watchable. You can get clips and stuff, and you can get the intro, but it's hard to find something you can actually watch, so...
Now, refresh my memory. Is that the one with the little girl?
Yeah.
The two little kids.
Like they crash, the spaceship crashes on
the
door or something?
Yeah. And Wilford Brimley.
That's the right thing to do.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm Wilford Brimley, and I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes about diabetes.
Well, it's interesting that there's a lot of similarity. And Eric, I want to come back to a point that you raised about being the young guy on the block, not having a chance to see the originals in their original theatrical run. So I'm going to assume you came into it through the prequels?
No, actually. I saw all 3 of the original movies before I ever saw a prequel.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I think my earliest memory is actually just the sound of the lightsabers, because I'm pretty sure I had a babysitter that watched it while I was a kid, and I was supposed to be in bed, but I...
What town did you grow up in?
Shiloh.
Oh, no, it wasn't me.
Just the sound of the lightsaber, I think is the earliest memory I actually have of it.
I find the whole thing to be very fascinating. Like, so Eric and Andy and Henry and myself, like, we didn't get to see A New Hope right away. So, like, in your case, Henry, with the audio narrative sort of filling in the holes for you, I can remember, in our neighborhood having Star Wars toys, and it was very much the same thing, playing with your friends. And of course, your friends, hopefully they had different toys than you did, and you all came together and you had this larger adventure. But it's like, I felt like I was that kid who was doing it wrong, because it's like you say, you're using your Death Star droid to fly an X-Wing. It's like, wait a minute, that doesn't work.
It really didn't work. It didn't work because the figure didn't actually fit in.
With the wide arm stance. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I guess, that naturally leads us into sort of the first topic that I really want to dig down on a bit. And that is actually to sort of talk about the films themselves and sort of, our thoughts and feelings about them. And maybe we can talk a little bit about sort of the legacy of just the films for a moment. And, going back to that, not being able to see them in their original run, I felt really, really lucky that, in the 90s when the special edition came out, I was there every night for opening night of all three films. So even though I didn't get to see them in their original run, I did get that theatrical experience with the special editions. And like them or hate them, that was very special for me to be able to experience that.
Yeah,
I get that completely.
Yeah, and I think looking back, it's easy to forget what a drought of content there was for Star Wars for that whole time. From Jedi, when it went out of the theater, until those special editions came in, what was it, the late 90s?
Just prior to The Phantom Menace, so what, 96?
Yeah, we had, the books and the early EU stuff was there.
Yeah.
But in terms of popular culture, once the toys were out of the store, and it was gone.
Yeah, in high school, all I had was the Marvel Comics run, which was really bad.
Do you remember what year that ended?
No. It strikes me like 89, 90.
Yeah.
In around that time.
I just remember the Marvel run being so ridiculous that it just
over the top.
Yeah, it really couldn't hold my interest as a reader, so I never did pick up on them.
I think it always felt like it wasn't the story that came from the movies or from any of the fiction, right? It was, over the top. It was like space pirates kind of thing in the comic book. I always thought.
Yeah, it was more like Flash Gordon stuff. Like
for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
So special editions, yes or no? I'm just going to kind of go around here, Scott. Yes or no?
Sure.
Yeah,
it's
Henry?
more content.
I don't watch them now.
No.
If I'm going to sit down and watch, it's going to be the original.
Sure.
Release, sure. But I don't feel particularly strongly about
No, eh? Andy, what about you?
Han shot
Hang on
first.
a sec.
Han did shoot first. Yeah. Eric, what about you, buddy?
Again, I couldn't tell you. It was whatever babysitter brought.
I have no legitimate reason not to like them.
Sure.
I think maybe when I was in my late teens or early 20s and they came out, and I was like, wow, that's kind of different, But in retrospect, that's what he always wanted to do with them. So,
yeah,
like artistically, I think, and he did push some more boundaries with the special editions too. Like he did develop some new tech, and that's the thing that like not a lot of people know, that all those weird choices that he made throughout, the succession of the films were all pushing boundaries cinematically, filmmaking wise, and and they still do that, like right up to The Mandalorian.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason, what about you? Special editions, yay or nay?
Well, I'll tell you. I think, so I get a little bit of a long-winded answer. Like anybody that knows me knows that that's not the case most of the time. But honestly, I'm a no on the special editions. And it's not because I don't recognize that they did some good things technologically, that some of the special effects were cleaned up and they looked super nice. But I feel like what they added, it outweighed what they took away from it, overshadowed what they added to it. What they brought to it with the special editions, I felt, was a new sense of morality, and Eric already touched on it with that whole Han shot first. In my mind, that changed the entire, not only the movies as we saw them, but it changed everything going forward. The moral system shifted. I didn't think that Han Solo was a bad dude in the first movie, and then they had to make it like this ridiculous, he missed a shot from 3 feet away, and then Han shot in self-defense.
Yeah.
That wasn't the morality of the time. He was a rogue. He was the guy who would do that. That's why he was Han Solo.
And I have to agree.
Right.
I have to agree with
and
you
they
on that.
carried that forward. They carried that morality forward to all the cartoons, to the Jedi code in the later episodes. It really, as far as I'm concerned, watered down a lot of what they were trying to do. The black and white between the villains, the rogues, the anti-heroes, and the heroes. There's no more anti-heroes. Everybody's just a good guy or a really bad guy, black and white, almost caricatures. Whereas in the beginning, you had those shades of gray. You had Han Solo.
Right.
I understand that it's a small point, but I just couldn't get past it.
I would suggest that it's not a small point. I think this is a very big picture sort of perspective. But if I watch Star Wars and Empire, those are, by and large, movies with adult consequences. It starts even in Jedi a little bit, but beyond the original trilogy, there's almost like, I don't want to use the word infantilization because that's a little too strong, but there is.
I think it's pretty apt.
I think watering down is a good point in that you get to the point that in Last Jedi, where Poe commits mutiny, literally.
Yeah.
And then as he's being hauled away, the commanders are like, "Oh, I really like him. He's feisty."
Yeah.
You know, and this universe where there's actual, adult consequences for decisions and things like that has been completely, watered down.
Yeah, completely stripped out of it.
I have to say that the special editions as well, and this may or may not be a popular opinion here, but exposed for me, great filmmaker, but as a writer's concerned, George Lucas is a hack.
Oh, buddy.
I don't think you're alone in that.
I got conversations to have about this point.
Yeah, jump in there, Eric.
So when you first asked me if I wanted to do this, I told you, like, I am the worst type of Star Wars fan to do this because I'm kind of like a lapsed Catholic in terms of Star Wars.
Okay,
like,
that's fair.
I used to love it when I was first getting into fantasy and sci-fi. It was like, ooh, cool space wizards. Like, that was my thing.
Sure.
And then as I grew up and read more sophisticated fantasy and sci-fi, I got to the point where I was like, wow, this is just really badly written. And
right.
I couldn't connect with it emotionally anymore because of how poorly written it was. So for a long time, I would just tell anyone who asked me about Star Wars, I was just like, I'm not a fan of Star Wars, don't bother. So it's taken a lot of other things to get me back into it. Things like Rogue One was the first thing that really pulled me back. And later on, I started watching some of the cartoons. And just recently, I finally watched The Mandalorian. So.
Yeah, and those are all points that I really want to hit on. So I want to go back to the Han Solo thing for a second, because we all accept that, his original presentation was the roguish pirate character. And there was no qualms about that. You didn't know if he was going to do the right thing. You kind of hoped he would, but they really wanted him to be this pirate character. And until he showed up at the very end and saved Luke's bacon, okay, kid, you're all clear, now let's blow this thing, you thought he had exited the picture. Fast forward to the Disney era, and you have Solo, which, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, tries to correct that in the Han shot first context, where he's facing off with and I can't think of the character's name now.
Tobias Beckett. And so, Beckett, who ostensibly was the mentor character for Han and basically taught him the rules. Do we consider that moment a redeeming moment for that character? I definitely thought it was a nod to us, right? Like, that didn't like that scene being changed, like for sure.
Like a wink and a tip of the hat.
Sure, absolutely. But I'm now this may go against popular opinion as well, but I'm a huge fan of that movie.
You're not alone.
Fan of that movie.
I think a lot of people at the table.
I like that
Solo.
one too.
Yeah, that
I did. I liked it all right.
It was unsung. I thought for me that was the best one since Return of the Jedi.
The biggest critique against Solo was pure timing. It just came out at the wrong time. Everybody was I would suggest that everybody was so disenchanted with The Last Jedi that, throwing Solo out within 6 months of that really, kind of left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. And
how much of that was Russian bots? Because that movie was like watching a fucking piece of art.
It may have very well been that. And I agree with you that film, tons of fan service, and yet a very solid story that really stands on its own merits as far as I'm concerned.
There's tons of choices in that movie that I would have never made, but I had to accept, and they felt true to the characters for me. And all this crazy madness on the internet about it was I was like, more than anything, that's what was making me sort of sick of Star Wars. All this hate that just seemed like.
Well,
yeah,
I think 100.
I got to tell you, I'm a big fan when we're talking about Solo, and I'm going to put Rogue One in there as well.
Yeah, definitely.
I will say this, and like we're saying a lot of this may be an unpopular opinion, but maybe not at this table, but I think at large
true.
it is.
Yeah.
I think the best actually crafted movies, and I'll explain when I say this, the best crafted movies in the Star Wars universe are Rogue One and Solo.
I think
Now,
you're right.
I think the classic trilogy and the prequel trilogy, if you look at them as crafted movies, they're awful. The only thing that saves the original one is he's created this fantastic world that captures us. So that was amazing, but the writing was terrible. The dialogue was terrible.
The editing saved that movie.
Oh yeah,
And
the
charm
audio and the visuals. Oh.
There was a lot of charm in the first movies.
Oh hell yeah!
And that saved it.
Yeah.
The prequels didn't have any of the charm, but they had more special effects and the same world. So we watched it and we forgave a lot of the garbage. The first one that didn't offer us garbage was Rogue One and Solo. We didn't have to get over. There's problems with every movie, but we didn't have to get over major amounts of garbage in those two movies. We didn't have to lean on the charm. We didn't have to lean on the special effects. We didn't have to lean on, we love this universe. We actually could watch those movies as standalone movies and go, oh, that was a good movie.
Yeah.
I think,
makes
right,
sense.
if you really, Disney admits they put Solo out at the wrong time. And it was too close to everything else. The other thing, too, if you released, the original or the prequel back in the 80s before Reddit, before the internet.
Pre-internet, yeah.
Right? I think you have a whole different environment for that movie to grow and organically, as you say, right? Talking to your friends at school and things like that. Now,
I think it would have flopped had there been no Reddit, no internet.
do you really?
The prequels? I do.
I think it would have been a different dialogue.
It was the internet excitement about those movies it was the first blockbuster that we were the hype train, and that was built up on the internet. I think without the internet, it gets exposed that those movies were actually pretty poor movies. Even though now I will say I enjoyed them both thoroughly, and I'd watch them again right now. But it's the world that I love. It's the concepts. It's the Jedi and the Sith and the. But if you actually make me read some of the dialogue and look at some of the stupid shit that happens in those movies, you're like, oh yeah, this movie that I love is actually awful.
There's some beautiful tragedy in the prequels, though. There's some it's actually executed really well.
See, I didn't find it was executed well. I found there were, like you say, there were some great plot points. I didn't think they executed them very well. Look at the only real plot point in the prequels is Anakin's fall. It was horrific. That was so poorly done.
Yeah.
But we love Vader. So we forgive it because at the end we get to see Vader and we're like, yeah, it's amazing. But it's emotions that take us there. It's not the movie.
Yeah,
it's the charm of the first movie.
Absolutely. Yeah, and speaking of emotions, I'd like to just jump back to Rogue One for a minute if I can.
Yeah.
Because I had a really unique experience of that movie when I saw it the first time with my family in the theater, because we went to see it the day after Carrie Fisher had passed.
Oh
yeah.
And that was extremely fresh, and she was really the first of the core cast members. Well, no, beyond Alec Guinness.
Yeah.
Beyond Alec Guinness. And to be fair, but beyond that, the first of the core who wasn't already relatively old, I suppose,
Right.
at the time when they were made. And she had just passed, and I had no concept, of course, and this was the big reveal, and thank God I didn't know this going in, that reveal at the end of Rogue One, where she turns around and says that line about hope. That was... I'd have to say that's the most emotionally impacting moment for me in any of the movies.
I cried like a schoolgirl.
yeah.
And it certainly was enhanced by the fact that knowledge that I wasn't expecting to see Carrie Fisher on the big screen in that context.
I don't think any of us were.
No, and that really, really hit. And the other thing that was so brilliant about Rogue One as a piece of filmmaking was they made such a deliberate effort to shoot it using the technology of the original Star Wars release. Yeah, they really avoided the CGI. It was all practical effects. They went back to the old stage settings for the ships, and that movie feels such a piece with that original world that I 100% buy it as a prequel.
Yeah, and I mean, Henry, you bring an interesting perspective because not only are you a farmer on top of all the other things you do, but you are also a stage actor.
More of a writer.
Okay.
My background is writing, but
right.
Yeah.
But you have experience in live theater.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I find that's a very credible opinion too. Certainly, the return to practical effects is something that the current makers of Star Wars are embracing. Certainly, The Mandalorian speaks volumes to that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's kind of... Sorry to jump in.
No, go ahead, Eric.
The practical effects kind of goes to the heart and soul of the thing, because back in the day, you could only do so much with the technology. It didn't exist. They invented most of it. The way I describe it to people is the Star Wars trilogies, they're like various stages of a Twinkie.
That's a big Twinkie.
And just follow me on this one.
Sure.
So the original trilogy is just a Twinkie. It's got the structure, it's got that sweet filling, it's got everything that you like, and it's where you start. And then you go back to the prequels, and it's kind of like you just sucked out all the icing. It's very sweet, but it doesn't have any of the structure, or as much of the structure. It's just candy to get you to the point of the original series. And then at the end, with the new series, you're kind of just left with the sponge. And it's just a certain structure, but it doesn't quite have the heart and soul of the rest of it.
It's funny you say the sponge, because I was going to say, what, the empty wrapper?
Well, the Star Wars structure is there. You can't tell me that those first two movies weren't exact copies of the first two original movies.
Yeah, Force Awakens, we know for sure.
So there was crumbs there.
There were crumbs.
When you make a copy, I mean, they say imitation is the best form of flattery, but I don't think that it is. I think that what they did was it's hack work.
When you're flattering yourself.
But that's
exactly
Hollywood in general.
When you just approach this thing and all it is a carbon copy excuse of a movie to try and bring people 40-somethings into their childhood, I think you should go into filmmaker jail, because it's no better, in my opinion, than that movie Battleship with Rihanna in it. That had nothing to do with the game of the 80s. They just took something we recognized and destroyed it for money. And I felt like that's what the last three movies were, even though to a degree I enjoyed them because I love Jedi, I love Sith and all that stuff. But when you actually watch the movie, you're like, this is awful. It's exactly the first two movies.
And
the third one was just hackery.
We're talking about Force Awakens here?
Yeah, sequel trilogy.
The sequel trilogy.
Yeah. Let me posit something just by way of devil's advocate. I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think there's a lot of that there. At what point does the Star Wars mythology become like the classic comic mythology? Like we've seen a variety of Batman reboots, both in a variety of media, right? There's novels, there's comics, there's several movies, and when you go to see a new Batman reboot, you're going to get certain things, right? Yeah. You're going to get the murder of the parents, the Joe Chill thing, right? You're going to get the intense training and this, and what you're getting somebody else's spin on that sort of core mythology. And I feel like Force Awakens wanted to do that, but at the same time they somehow failed. And I don't know if that's just because the Star Wars mythology is still too fresh, at least to us as like the first generation fans, or if there's something else about it that hasn't quite transcended in that way, or if they just screwed it up that badly.
Well, I tell you what I liked about this is going to relate to what you're saying, but I tell you what I liked about Rogue One, which is, by the way, my favorite of all the Star Wars films. I liked that finally we got to it, and this includes Solo, by the way. I liked Solo. I like all of them. I mean, even though I'm saying some unkind things here, I like all of the movies. But Rogue One was the first opportunity to explore the universe, not through the eyes of basically three people who hold the key to the entire universe's fate at every stage for years before and years after their death. These people, Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, and Han Solo, they're the only things that affect the universe's fate. And Rogue One was the first one to go, hey, there's other people here too.
Most big fantasies are like
Yeah.
that, though. They follow a few core characters throughout, generations. Lord of the
I
Rings.
don't know if you could. Even Lord of the Rings had a lot of different characters.
The Fellowship
A
was
lot
what,
of it.
9?
Yeah. And the Lord of the Rings is meant to be one series. They're not meant to be across 300 years.
No, true.
I just felt, and it's a much larger scale, too.
Yeah.
So you're saying like 3 people affect the fate of a country, which is basically what Middle Earth is the way that they... I can buy that. 3 people and only 3 people are going to affect the universe. Like, can we see somebody else?
Well, it took them 7 movies to find another woman.
Well,
So I just want to go back to what Henry said, though, his initial question about, like, at what point does the franchise become like a Marvel or other big comic company series? And I gotta say, we're there. We're there now. We're there now. Where every director, every writer, every person who works on a Star Wars project is bringing their own thing to it, and so it almost comes.
See, that's where I disagree.
You guys,
I don't think. Yeah, go ahead.
Pablo Hidalgo, the head of the story group.
Yeah,
everything goes through that guy. Not a thing gets checked and canonized unless it goes.
So I really want to nail on that one for a second, Hank. You mentioned the story group, and I have to tell you right now, that is my single largest criticism towards the sequel trilogy. And I was super excited when they said, "Hey, Disney bought the property; they own the farm now. We're going to put this. We're going to put this Star Wars story group together, and we're going to ensure that all of our projects going on from here to the end of time are within the same continuity." And it's like with the sequel trilogy, they completely ignored their own story group. There was no consistency and no continuity. And I'm all for.
They're no Kevin Feige, man.
I'm all for a director as an artist to be able to tell their cinematic story or their story their way. And as a segue to that, I'm very much anticipating this Snyder cut of Justice League. But when it comes to, Star Wars, there is a bit of an expectation that you're going to adhere to the tenets that you've set out by your own hand.
Exactly. I just wanted to touch on what was going on there. When he says, when is this, he thinks that it's reached that that comic book state now. I actually don't think they have. If you look at the Batman stuff, each guy is trying to bring his own creative edit to Batman. Totally true. When you look at the sequels and the post-original movies, up until the stuff they've done very recently, it's not bringing anything creative. They're just trying to find new ways to copy it. And I think it's but it's a significant difference.
Well, I mean, my opinion is the opposite. I think they did it when they started the sequel trilogy because they very deliberately went, okay, all of this extended universe continuity that we've been building in this interim, none of it exists anymore.
Right.
Young Jedi Knights gone. Courtship of Princess Leia didn't happen.
No, that's only since Disney bought the franchise, right?
Exactly.
Right. That's right.
And Lucas had always said that he reserved the right to just decanonize anything during that period.
Yeah,
anyway.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, that's fair, but
that stuff was always walking on eggshells,
As somebody who was brought back in by that,
I get that. Yeah.
My sister was the one who actually bought all the books. She read all the Courtship of Princess Leia and all that other stuff that came afterwards, and she eventually passed it on to me. That's how I got brought back in, and just to have all that go, nope, didn't happen.
That was frustrating.
That was what for me felt like that was when they jumped the shark.
Yeah, that was enraging. I heard a good argument many years ago where somebody said, "But Lucas said he can retcon anything at any time." The common argument at the time was, yes, but does it really belong to George Lucas anymore? Obviously, from a business standpoint, it's his intellectual property. Until he sold it, it was his. But at some point, a movie franchise becomes part of public consciousness, and you have to pay respects to that because that's why it's successful. That's what the public thinks of a movie. In the end, becomes the reality of what that movie's about.
And therein is the dog, chasing its own tail with The Force Awakens, right? That balance between fan service and it's like, because it's not yours anymore.
Right. But too much fan service. Like Eric says, it started with the sequels, which it totally did. But I would say in a more subtle way, it started with the prequels. They had to get, for example, they've got to say all the things that they said in the first movie. I get a bad feeling about this.
Sure.
Or the from a certain point of view, like, come on, can you?
Yeah.
Do we have to do the same things again just so that the 40-year-olds of us go, oh my God, he said it? That's
Well, the other side of that coin is the movies that we've all said that we enjoy the most, Rogue One and Solo. I call them the start of the Star Wars fan fiction movies.
oh, for sure, yeah,
Rogue One was all about plugging those plot holes,
right.
and Solo did a little bit more, and I mean, it's not a bad thing, and again, it's showing us that we can do other things in this universe.
Am I the only one that's heard the expression that George Lucas is his own biggest fan? Hence all of the
No.
edits and updates and the special editions and revisions and more revisions.
Yeah.
The footage of him and Rick McCallum screening The Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
And George Lucas says, I may have gone too far.
Well,
Oh,
doesn't
no
he say
way.
something?
Yeah. They couldn't edit it out.
They did.
Yeah.
I'm not going to bash on the sequels, too much because we've all got our opinions about them. But I definitely will.
I love it. If you stamp it with Star Wars, I'll eat it. I'll buy it.
Well, see,
I'll wear
and
it,
that's
I'll
where
wear
I
it,
am. Like,
make love to
you
it.
could paint Star Wars on a rock and put it in front of me and say it's new, and I will stare at it because it's new, right?
And I will.
And I got to say, I got to make the point that even though I've been pretty critical during this conversation, I am the exact same way. If you put Star Wars on it, I will watch it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I would say as well that, critical as I am of that whole storyline arc or lack thereof, there are a lot of things that I like about the sequel trilogy, and I like it significantly more than the prequel trilogy. The prequel trilogy to me and this goes back to what I was saying about Rogue One. The prequel trilogy never felt like it was part of that same world. And certainly not in an earlier time, because the use of the CGI was so overwhelming and so jarring. It was so jarring.
How rude.
That,
But
I had to, in the theater, I remember watching The Phantom Menace, and I literally had to look at the 7-year-old sitting down the row from me, who was just like wide-eyed and getting blown away, because this was probably his first Star Wars movie in a theater, and sort of, I had to watch the movie through his eyes, and then I could enjoy it, as it were.
For the record, The Phantom Menace still is my personal record for most theatrical viewings of a Star Wars film at 6 times.
I slept 24 hours to get into the theater to be first in line.
Yeah,
See a midnight showing.
I will say as a positive about the Phantom Menace, I love the fight scenes.
Yeah, I mean, we can touch on this a little bit later, but I'm just going to bring up right now. I'm going to skip ahead to The Mandalorian for a second. Everybody has watched this, yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So did everybody get a chance to watch the Disney Gallery, The Making of The Mandalorian?
I certainly
I
did.
didn't see it.
Okay, so I'm going to... Sorry, Jay, a little bit of a spoiler, but you need to go back and watch Gallery, and you need to pay particular attention to the episode where Dave Filoni goes on, and he waxes poetic to all the directors in the room. And I have to tell you, every director in that room goes silent, like pin drop silent when he goes on, and he regales why the Duel of the Fates is the most important lightsaber battle in the entire sequel. There's a reason why it's called the Duel of the Fates. It is for the fate of Anakin Skywalker. That Qui-Gon Jinn knows that he's the father that Anakin needs. And so quite literally, it's a make or break moment where had Qui-Gon had lived, we would not have gotten the fall from grace and the turn to Vader. Super, super cool moment in the franchise that, you want to talk about, fans and fan films. Dave Filoni is probably the most capable.
I'm so glad he's
the
in charge.
most capable fan out there, and anything that he does, I will watch it and I will invest in it as if Lucas had written it himself.
Did you know he was heavily involved in the Avatar: The Last Airbender?
Yeah, he got hired off of Avatar to do Clone Wars. Yeah,
man,
it's
brilliant.
No more.
Brilliant.
Anybody else have any closing points they want to put on the films before we move on to the next?
I think there's going to be a generation that doesn't know any better as original trilogy. Maybe you got some DVDs still kicking around. Maybe you have a VHS.
If you're lucky, you got a laser disc of the original print.
Maybe. But I mean, right? They're not making.
They're going to remake them.
Do you think they'll re-release
remake them?
In our lifetime? Yeah, there's going to be a remake.
Shot for shot.
There'll be enough fan pressure for Disney to pull
I
it
think,
out.
though, if you think really, it's getting hard to get your hands on a copy.
Yes.
An original.
Yeah. And as I say, my kids don't know anything other than the remakes.
Some of you
I
might
think
have.
Disney might do what they've been doing with their animated properties and flip the script and actually do animated fucking versions, excuse my language, of the Star Wars
Oh, yeah,
movies.
yeah. Instead of going from animated to live action.
Yeah,
That's
I think that's
awesome.
I think
That
so,
would be,
man.
I think that would
And
be
I'm
well
down.
received.
If they did it in the style of Clone Wars, I would give them all of my money.
I'll tell you,
It'd be
if they
dirty.
did it in the style of the TIE Fighter fan film,
Oh man,
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
Let's talk about that. That's excellent.
we're going to get there. So just let's close. Yeah, Henry, you got a point to make.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one last thing about
Sure.
about A New Hope in particular. Sometimes it's, and Scott alluded to this too, about like this is all his kids know, and that's the same for my kids too in terms of the Star Wars franchise. But
Yep.
but if you ever want to try and recreate for yourself the impact of the original Star Wars, take a weekend or a week or whatever you have during whenever the next quarantine rolls around,
It's like tomorrow.
and
And
watch.
Move to Nova Scotia.
Watch a whole bunch of movies that were released between 1973 and 1977
Right.
and what was big at the box office in the 70s. And it's some dark-ass shit.
Yeah.
It's like The Godfather. It's Taxi
Jaws.
Driver.
Oh, that's right.
Jaws.
That's right.
It's all of these movies that were basically sort of expressing this very dark worldview, which is pretty much, the 1970s, between, the 60s hangover and the economic crises and everything else and Watergate and everything else that was going on at that time that was sort of like dragging down the culture, just emotionally, I think, in a lot of ways. And then watch A New Hope and those special effects and the music and that whole bizarre, wonderful space fantasy that it is.
Right.
And that's why that movie started this whole thing.
Right.
Because it was really needed, I think, at that time, just culturally.
Offered the escape.
That's a really good point. I mean, if you look back at the movies at the time in that genre, you get things like Planet of the Apes. What's the other one there? The Soylent Green.
2001.
I mean, 2001. These were some dark ass movies.
Yeah. Wow. So lots
That's a good point.
of opinions flying around here on the films. The classic trilogy is still near and dear to a lot of us. And it sounds like we're kind of on equal footing when it comes to the sequels and the prequels. But we do agree on one thing, that we, despite all our criticisms, we love them. So I'm just going to go around the table and I'm going to ask everybody, of all of the films, whether it's, Lucas era or Disney era, what's your favorite film? And I'm going to start with our call-in guest. So start with you, Jay. What's your favorite?
I have to qualify it, but it's Rogue One. Now,
Sure.
It's Rogue One because of the original trilogies. Because the original trilogies set up the framework that I love so much. I love that universe. But Rogue One was the best, in my opinion, the best delve into that universe. So I guess it's Rogue One with respect to Episode 4.
Good answer. Eric, what about you?
I got to agree with Jay, but for different reasons. It's Rogue One because it took the first step, I think, even just in Hollywood in general, in showing the world that we don't have to abandon these universes just because the movies are over.
Right.
We can dive back in and do something adjacent and or different.
Oh, that's a great point.
If there's just enough will to do it.
Sure.
It was really nice to see that everybody died at the end of Rogue One.
Yeah, and that there
no loose ends.
There was a version of the script that Jin and Cassian survived. So, as much as I am eagerly, I would love to see what that
Rebels
script looked like.
canonized time travel.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. The world between worlds. Hank, over to you, my friend. What's favorite film?
The Empire Strikes Back, and if you don't think that's the case, we probably can't be friends in real life.
Well, then you should hang up the phone right now because I am sorely going to disappoint you.
The Empire Strikes Back, man. So much
Great
about
movie.
that film. Just the time that I saw it, the age that I was at, like 10 years old, and I had that memory of Star Wars, but that thing just imprinted on me, and I must have gone to the theater 10 times. Just kept going over and over and over. And there was a few theaters that actually showed late in the run. They showed A New Hope back before when it was just called Star Wars.
Yep.
And Empire back to back, and it was just I just can't say enough. Empire.
Fantastic. So now here in the studio, I'm gonna have to disappoint you. It's Return of the Jedi, my friend. Everybody says they love Empire, but they really do love Return of the Jedi. And if I can quantify that, Return of the Jedi really lays it on the nose, the whole good versus evil. And it's like, despite the fact that Luke Skywalker is wearing black, he might as well be wearing a giant white Stetson hat. Like, it is Return of the Jedi, and it's the full realization that Luke is the one to save the galaxy for the second time, I might add. And I don't know, it's just, there's a feel good about that movie from start to finish that, just isn't there in any of the other films. Like, I can watch that movie with a smile from start to finish every time.
I will agree. I'm an Empire guy. It's story building. There's suspense. There's trauma. It's just a cool story from start to finish, right? You don't know what's coming up. And I'll agree, Jedi ties it up beautifully. But man, Empire takes that from a goofy space opera and makes it a trilogy. It's what ties 1 and 3 together. And it does it wonderfully.
There was a romance in it, and I didn't go, oh, man.
Yeah, that's true, eh? What do you say, Henry?
I'm going to go with a tie between Empire and Rogue One. I don't know if that's allowed, but you couldn't make me choose between them.
Sure.
Further to what Scott said, it takes that original world, but then it really is the first one that creates that sense that within the context of this one movie, this universe is a world where anything is possible. In that one movie, you've got an ice planet, you've got Dagobah, you've got Bespin, which is like in the clouds somehow, but it all works. And it all works perfectly, and it adds so much color and life and variety to that universe. Whereas Star Wars is pretty much, A New Hope is pretty much set indoors, Yeah,
you're talking a full third of that movie is in the Death Star.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's very tight and it's very constrained because the budget was very constrained. And then with Empire, it's that perfect combination of a big budget and a good story and it doesn't, fall into and we got to blow up a planet-sized battle station motif.
Yeah, absolutely. Andy, what do you think, sir?
For me, it's got to be a tie between Empire and Jedi.
Interesting.
The story that gets you to the end of Empire leaves you in a dark place. Like, everything's falling apart. But then they bring you back with Jedi, and everything works out. The universe is reestablished.
Well, that's a great answer.
You're listening to Fandom Power.
So there's this period, 1983 rolls along and Jedi rolls out of the theater. And then it's like, what are you going to do next? And, at this point, we've had one official Star Wars television project. And that's the 1979 holiday special. So for anybody who hasn't seen it recently, just tell you, it's on YouTube now and you can go and watch it at your leisure if you can stand it.
It's super bad. B. Arthur is in it. Why
It is.
B. Arthur in it?
B. Arthur and Art Carney.
It's crazy.
They're
it's
both
absolutely
in it.
Crazy.
Has everybody seen it?
I have yet to watch it.
Not from start to finish.
You've got to stomach it. It's it's like a car crash. You just can't look away.
I know I've started watching it on YouTube. I couldn't tell you how. I don't remember how far I got. I'm pretty sure I didn't see the whole thing.
I'm actually amazed at how many people that I talk to in my generation, my age. I'm 49, and that saw it live on TV.
Yeah, in the broadcast.
And even though it only broadcast once.
One time.
What year did it broadcast?
1979.
Yeah, see, and I think I wasn't even. I must have been. It was probably like that Christmas that I got my thing, so I wouldn't have even known to look for it. Yeah.
And it had, I lived up north in Kirkfield, Ontario, and there had to be we maybe got 3 channels. So it had to have been CBC or that it was broadcast.
Right.
So
yeah.
Super obscure.
I definitely remember seeing it in its broadcast run. I don't remember a lot of the weird stuff like the quasi sex scene with, I don't remember that. And then watching it again as an adult and I'm like, oh yeah, that's really wow. But at the same time, the holiday special introduced a few things that, like it or not, have been recanonized in the new Disney canon. So, the idea of Life Day was introduced in the 79 special.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, if there's one redeeming quality about the special, it's got to be the animated short, which includes the first appearance of Boba Fett.
Absolutely.
And I think, right, that plays right into the future, and that kind of his rifle.
Yeah, of course.
It's a pull right out of that scene.
The big tuning fork rifle. That it's made its way into the Mandalorian, and it's cool.
Is that the
to
mythosaur
see.
that he's riding in that too?
I believe it is supposed to be the mythosaur. That's right, with the downward facing. I guess they're horns. I guess coming out the side of its head.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting though. So I mean, if you didn't know, Hank, I'm sure you knew this one, but the holiday special has a distinctly Canadian connection, as it was animated by Nelvana.
Absolutely.
And Nelvana that would go on to work on some of the next Star Wars television properties, and that would be the Droids and Ewoks television series in 84, 85?
I have a personal connection to the Ewoks TV show. My best friend Kelly's older brother Mark worked at Nelvana and was a background artist on the Ewoks before he went on to bigger and better things. Five Will Goes West and feature films but in his room he had a picture of a Duloc camp. For you guys
the Dulocs
cartoon, it's the bad guys from the Ewok show, and it was a rejected drawing because there was Ewok skulls on pikes, and like it was seriously dark and gory. And he let me have it. I had it in my bedroom for quite a long time when I was a kid. Yeah.
What I liked about the series, not particularly Ewoks, because I found it. I don't know what the right word is. I can only say maybe it was a little more juvenile, kind of targeted at maybe just a slightly younger audience. But I always thought that Droids, it was more meant for me, for my age group. And I would have been, 10 or 11 at the time that it came out. The idea that the droids, passing from, master to master, before any of the expanded universe, before any of the sequel stuff that changed all that, it was just this interesting way of keeping in touch, like Jason said, that universe. And so as much as Rogue One built that universe, I mean, Droids was doing it, 15 years earlier. I mean, the precursor to pod racing was a direct lift right out of one of the Droids episodes.
No, absolutely. Droids was solid. It had some really good moments. They had...
And you've got Anthony Daniels reprising his role as C-3PO. So, I mean, here's a guy who can say that, he's been involved in everything. Any other Droids memories for anybody?
Daniels is the one that's been in the most different Star Wars properties, probably by a long shot, too, right?
Yeah. I always found it weird that in Droids, like, they mimic that same animation style that they used in the holiday special. And did you notice that all the humanoid characters were three-fingered?
I didn't. No,
yeah,
I'd have to go back and check that out.
All three-fingered, yeah.
Oh, that was an animation choice back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's before people learned how to draw hands.
Your hands are hard.
So then, Star Wars has kind of had its ups and downs as far as television properties go, and I think we can agree that as much as the holiday series was maybe a downward moment, the Droids and Ewoks were kind of a turnaround for them. That brings us kind of to your first memory, Andy, going into the two Ewok films. So we had Caravan of Courage, an Ewok adventure, and then its sequel, Ewoks: The Battle for Endor. And that, to be honest with you, I have almost zero memory of both of them.
My main memories are those two kids crashing. I know I watched it. I know I watched it a bunch of times, but past that, I did not see Battle for Endor.
No. I couldn't figure what would compel these kids who were, ostensibly marooned on Endor to get rescued and then have to come back. It just didn't make any sense to me.
Do you know who produced those movies? Was it Lucasfilm?
I didn't, in my research, I didn't look that hard at it.
Yeah. If I think back, my memories of, especially that one with the kids, is it reminded me of like sort of a mediocre Disney movie.
Yeah,
now, and I doubt that Disney was involved. But if you think of the ones you used to watch,
The Wonderful World of Disney, like the Sunday night movie,
Escape to Witch Mountain,
yes,
or something like that.
Very
it
much.
It had that same tone, of like these are kids that are in over their head, but that there's no stakes here. Like nothing bad's going to happen to them.
Yeah.
Gentleman's name was Thomas G. Smith. He was hired by Lucas. He was a television producer.
Okay.
No fanfare there.
No. Well, that's too bad because it's unfortunate that we don't really remember them, but I guess that really speaks to the overall quality of them.
I haven't seen them as an adult. I watched them when I was a kid, probably a couple times, just because they were Star Wars content in them.
Yeah.
I mean, is it too cynical to say that they existed to sell more Ewok plushies? I mean...
Well, it's funny.
That's probably true.
But let's look at it this way. We'll jump ahead a bit to merchandising a little bit. You're talking the Final 17 and the Droids Ewoks figure line came out in 1985, and then after that, there was nothing. So,
what year were those two movies?
84 and
84 and 85.
Yeah, 84 and 85.
Battle for Endor was 85.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were just trying to keep the toys rolling.
Did they get action figure releases in the Kenner line?
Droids definitely did. I'm not sure that the Ewoks actually did.
I know Droids did for sure. I actually had a Droids C-3PO come through the shop here a couple of years ago, so that was pretty exciting.
True.
So then television kind of dries up there for a little while, and we don't really get a whole lot.
I'd just like to reference one other Star Wars television from that period.
Yeah.
And that's the Muppet Show.
The Muppet Show.
Yeah. With Mark Hamill.
I totally forgot that.
Don't do that.
And that was my television highlight because it was that combination of the Jim Henson and the Lucas. These are like, two of the biggest icons of my childhood. And to see those worlds come together. And they had a lot of fun with it, and it was silly and goofy, but it was wonderful. And, just like this image of Kermit, or everybody, it was like a running joke in that thing of like, hey, who's your tailor?
Yeah. Or to have Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker showing up, pigs in space.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
Talk about on the nose, right?
That's right, yeah.
So just looking, there was an Ewoks toy line.
There was. Oh, interesting. Okay, so that's Ewoks to support the cartoon.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I know later on in some of the more modern stuff, there was a version of Wicket that came with a movie-accurate hood and then a cartoon, the green hood with the cape on it. So it was a nice little nod to the show. So then television kind of dries out, throughout the late 80s and into the 90s. And then the makers of Samurai Jack are suddenly doing 5-minute short films that later would go on to be smashed together into an hour-long series originally titled, oddly enough, The Clone Wars. So the Genndy Tartakovsky Clone Wars, anybody have any thoughts on that?
I have a sketchbook full of me trying to draw like that. a full sketchbook of Star Wars drawings, just pausing that friggin' thing over and over. That was amazing. Seeing Jedi, I think it's Mace Windu who pulls a Star Destroyer from orbit with the Force.
Right.
And I'm like, that's what I'm talking about. Like, Yoda's telling Luke, you could do anything with the Force. I'm just lifting this little plane, but I could, there is limitless power here available, kid, if you could just tune in. And then you see Mace Windu, crush Grievous's heart with his fist.
Exactly.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, that's what I was talking about. That got me really, really, really back into things, for sure.
Yeah,
I think there's this attitude because of the CGI Clone Wars that came afterwards that people are very quick to dismiss the Tartakovsky stuff. But like, if you didn't,
I love that series.
Yeah, and I would agree. Like, when it came out on DVD and I finally could sit down and I could watch it in its entirety and watch it, I would say, as it was intended, as a complete narrative, it adds so much. To me, that particular chunk of the Clone Wars is superfluous with the later CGI stuff. It's just a different aspect of the war.
It doesn't feel different to me. Like, it feels like snippets from the story all kind of jammed in, and the other one is like more linear. But if anybody hasn't seen it, it's on YouTube, stem to stern, in one video.
Oh, fantastic! That's good to know.
I think I watched it on the Cartoon Network in the snippets.
Yeah.
So it was like in between, and you'd get that little 5 minute. Not a huge fan of the animation style, but really it takes it a different direction, and it was a lot darker, I think. Almost that Teletoon After Dark kind of feeling, that throwback. I think I remember them getting, was it Obi-Wan or maybe it was Anakin, and they get swallowed up by some kind of gelatinous cyborg.
Right.
And they exploded from the inside.
That's right.
out.
Yeah, that was Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
I can't. That villain has a name, and I can't tell you what it is.
Right, and I remember that. I'm like, This is not a kid's cartoon.
No, not by any means. And I mean, look at.
Well,
go ahead, Eric.
No, I just wanted to say, as again the youngest man in the room.
Yep.
As somebody who grew up on things like Powerpuff Girls and Dexter's Lab, I can understand why that art style doesn't appeal to you, but it absolutely appeals to people who grew up on those sort of
Absolutely
Cartoon Network shows.
Yeah.
And again, like you said, Samurai Jack. So the thing about the Tartakovsky shorts is that is art.
I would absolutely agree with that.
For all that it tells a story, and for all that every other Star Wars movie or show tells a story, I think specifically those shorts are meant more as an art form than anything else.
I thought
that's how I feel about it.
They felt like fan fiction, like that guy was allowed to flex.
Again,
you know what I mean? Like,
not that it's a bad thing, but
no,
I agree.
No, absolutely.
And I think that guy's name was Dirge.
Dirge, that's right. That is right. Dirge was the name of the
I've been
villain.
sitting here thinking about it the entire time, like I can't remember his name, and I've been obsessing that.
No, you're right. It's
Dirge.
The Tartakovsky Clone Wars really established, again, like some of the more enduring elements that would come afterwards, I think kind of got established there, like Asajj Ventress.
Oh, hell yeah.
And she was done superbly wicked in that series, and I just loved it. The episode, particularly with the ARC troopers, and the episode is completely without a spoken word, and it's all hand signals, and the soldier in me really, really appreciated that. Like, I really dug that.
I actually like the whole Clone Wars series, right from the original animation to the CGI one.
Yeah, and I would agree with you on that. I went to the theater to see I guess it's the feature-length pilot episode of Clone Wars.
Right.
Me too, yes. Sir.
And I've since, when season, what's the last one? 7? When season 7 dropped on Disney, I went back and I tried to rewatch just to brush up on some stuff, and I went all the way back to that movie, and it is the worst piece of the entire thing, with the going to rescue Jabba's son. How low, and I don't mean in terms of quality, but how low they were aiming, their target audience with, Anakin referring to Ahsoka as Snips, her calling him Sky Guy, and R2-D2 was Tui. Like, it was just so juvenile, and it was like, oh my god, is this what we're in for? I'm like, okay, I'll watch it because it's got Star Wars on it, but thank God that every season of that show got successively better and better and better and better. And arguably this last season, season 7, that overlaps directly with Revenge of the Sith, is definitely a high moment for that series.
I was going to say they sort of redeem that little movie in season 7 because there's an accident when they're chasing Zero and a ship crashes into a building off in the background, and it's the thing that kills those 2 girls' parents.
Oh, that's
and
right.
Orphans them.
Yes.
And yes. So they Filoni knows what he's doing.
Of course he does. Yeah, I mean, he really does have his finger on the pulse of all things Star Wars, and if you're active in the fan community online, you see there's a lot of strong language and strong opinions about removing Kathleen Kennedy from the head of Lucasfilm, and I'm neither here nor there on that. But if they were ever to hand the reins over to anybody, there is no better choice than Dave Filoni to take over the whole thing.
I like him in a creative spot. I don't want him to have too much power. I like him right where he is.
Sure.
Power corrupts. I don't know that you're allowed to flex at those levels of, I keep saying power, but I really like him where he is, where he's in the trenches.
Yeah.
He's still telling, Rebels. Could we go on to Rebels?
We could definitely touch on Rebels. That's next on the.
That's some of my favorite stuff.
Yeah, me too.
Since the old stuff, Rebels is brilliant.
Me too. Loved it.
Amazing storytelling. Really gets into some cool crap with the Force at the end. Like,
I think you say it exactly, and the storytelling, and that's who he is a storyteller.
Yeah, and it feels like an extension of the Clone Wars, and Mandalorian feels like an extension of Rebels, and I'm like, that's a story I wouldn't mind following for generations, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Anybody know if there's any legs to these Disney show rumors, like the Lando Calrissian show, or I know that they're in the production with the Cassian Andor. That's moving forward, and
I've not heard anything about the Lando thing. I did hear about the Cassian thing, and I'm very much Cassian Andor, as far as I'm concerned, was the most compelling character in Rogue One. When he's having that argument with Jyn on the U-wing, and he's like, "Suddenly you care? I've been doing this since I was, how old?" Or
that's right.
You're
not the only one to lose people.
That guy's got some serious demons, and I want to know his story because he's a very interesting character to me. But yeah, that's on the move. Haven't heard too much on the Obi-Wan front lately.
Hello there.
I know they're in some rewrites or some, I don't know, they're trying to calm people down. And I try to stay away from all the internet hype because it inevitably turns negative. And I really want to be surprised. I was looking at Star Wars news every morning, like when all the sequels were coming out, and I was like, oh, they're filming here, and oh, there's an X-Wing in this shot, and somebody saw a Wookiee over, and and then I just went dead silent for The Mandalorian, and I'm so friggin' glad that I did with some of the stuff that they let go, like popped up there. Like, yeah.
I have to admit that I am a news junkie, so I'm that guy that as much as I want to be surprised, I can't not look at it.
And with this franchise, and with all of the resources that Disney has at its disposal, and the bar that Game of Thrones set for television, what would a Game of Thrones scale Star Wars series that could run for 8 or 9 or 10 seasons?
The Old Republic.
I was about to say
the Old Republic.
I thought that's what we were getting when they were Benioff and Weiss were in talks with Disney.
I would clarify.
Did that not go anywhere? Or
I would clarify Knights of the Old Republic.
Yeah, so we're talking like that 3,000 years prior to the film.
Not the Old Republic itself.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead, Scott.
Because now there's the new novelization.
Yeah, High Republic, and that's supposed to be at the height of
the Jedi.
Yeah,
so
it's Yoda in his prime.
Yeah, 300 to 400 years before
the films. Yeah.
So Yoda,
less wrinkly Yoda.
Well, it's about 200 years. I think it's set 200 years. So he's about 600, and apparently it's like frontiersman. Like
he's a
they're
journeyman.
Helping people colonize the galaxy, and they're keeping people safe. And it's going to feel more like samurai-y. That's what I've been reading anyway. I haven't actually touched anything.
I
like a Magnificent Seven Jedi.
Could be good.
Ideally, I think they're doing the story from a point of view of like 7 to 8 characters, from Jedi Master to Padawan to, already they're talking about disillusioned Jedis even then at the height. So it's very interesting. It's very frontier based, kind of where the core was still the Wild West, and, they would build these space stations, and that was sort of the centralized push from these stations, right? But, I was a fan of the novelization, and that, as we talked about, the decanonization kind of broke my heart, right? Of all these books you read as a young man.
No, it's true. I read them all, yeah. It's true.
And I read a lot.
I'm looking forward to this, and they're doing it through a little bit of youth fiction, some adult fiction, and they're doing comics. And the Yoda storyline is apparently going to be in the comic.
Fantastic.
And, kind of excited.
Just touching on Yoda specifically for a moment, though, like that's one of, if there is one great mystery surrounding Star Wars, it's that Yoda is this. He's an enigma. He's undefined. Yes, we saw Yaddle in the prequel trilogy, and we can accept that she's of the same species. But Star Wars has gone out of its way to conceal that. You can go back to the whole, the original drafts or early drafts of Star Wars were from the Journal of the Whills, so his species is a Whill, whatever a Whill is. But really, Star Wars has really worked very, very hard, or maybe they haven't. Maybe they just completely ignored it because they know. Again, it's just one of those, it is the great mystery of Star Wars that nobody really knows where he comes from. Nobody knows what they're about. And we're even seeing that in The Mandalorian where, the armorer has charged Din Djarin to reunite him with his people. Well, does that mean reunite him with his species or reunite him with Jedi? Like, not really sure where that's going. But
the rumor is we'll get the name of the race this season.
You know what, though? Again, going back to
not too much.
The great mystery, I would be okay if it was never, ever, ever revealed. Star Wars as a franchise is one of those things where And this dips into the merchandising bit of things, where every character from every scene at some point is going to get an action figure, they're going to get a name, and they're going to get a whole fleshed out backstory one way or another. It's only a matter of time. We've seen it with everything.
Yeah, but
that's how they ruined Wolverine.
Yeah.
Why'd you have to bring that up?
That's
I
a whole
just
other
forgotten about it.
As soon as they put the infant Yoda type character in that show, that's the hook of the show.
Of course it is.
Is we're going to 100%.
But if we never get there, I would be fine watching, surrogate father and son run around the galaxy doing bounty hunter shit for 10, 12 seasons.
Are you guys familiar with Lone Wolf and Cub?
Yeah. I would be completely satisfied with watching them traipse the galaxy.
Very into that.
And never ever, develop him as it's Yoda species. I don't need.
It feels like Kung Fu, the legend, or not the legend, the original Kung Fu TV show to me.
Yeah,
like that one. And I could do that for 10 seasons straight. No problem.
Yeah, for sure.
Very trophic.
And you've just aged a couple of us again.
Just going back to Rebels for a minute. Solid voice cast. Freddie Prinze Jr. as Kanan Jarrus has got to be one of the best performances, for a hero character. I didn't realize it was Freddie Prinze Jr. until I actually sat down and read the credits.
It's my wife's favorite Star Wars character.
But what about Sam Witwer's Darth Maul?
Whoo!
I mean,
so happy they used him in the Solo film.
Yeah,
because apparently Ray Park's stuff was awful.
I always regretted that they didn't do anything with Darth Maul. He had one or two lines, and then he had a kick-ass fight scene, and that was about it.
Oh, you mean at the end?
Such a waste.
I think Lucas was trying to recreate the Boba Fett effect
with Darth Maul.
No, Lucas purposefully killed it. That's why they cut him in half, so there'd be no question that he's never coming back.
Robot legs, bitch.
Yeah,
right. So I didn't say Lucas did it well. I said that's why he did it.
That's not to go backwards, but really, didn't the prequel trilogy do that with every movie? They introduced these awesome villains and then just off them. Like, what? They had no longevity. Darth
Have you
Maul,
ever heard the theory that all the villains are different stages of Anakin?
What do you mean?
That's an interesting one. I would love to explore that a little further.
Let me try to think about this. Darth Maul is the youthful rage. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like the youthful, unfocused kind of like just pure adrenaline and rage.
Yep.
Grievous is the broken veteran.
Well, Grievous is last, really. So, Dooku is the fallen knight.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Grievous is the broken robot, partially human or partially sentient, and so that's how he set up those villains to be the stages of Anakin's fall.
So Anakin is really the culmination of all of those three villains into one being, I suppose.
Some good writing there. It just wasn't executed well.
And I will say that's one thing the prequel trilogy has over the sequel trilogy is actually interesting villains.
Yeah, they really do. They for sure do.
Yeah.
Not that Kylo Ren wasn't an interesting villain. It just, unfortunately, going back to that whole not paying attention to your own story group, having no continuity with those characters really did the whole trilogy a disservice.
Yeah.
I mean, the lightsaber temper tantrum kind of undermines his whole deal.
I liked it.
No, that was his character. I love the fact
that
he wasn't a classic villain.
No, he was.
I love the fact that he was a bit of a baby.
Does anybody have teenagers?
Yeah. I mean, he was his grandfather personified. The only thing that he didn't have in his favor was the expectation that he have his tantrums in private because he belonged to the Jedi Order. Kylo Ren had no such compunctions, and he could unload wherever the hell he wanted to.
If you guys get a chance, check out the Kylo Ren. It's like a 4-issue miniseries. It explains part of how Snoke turns him and how he joins the Knights of Ren, but as one of their members, and then he kills their leader to take the saber. It's kind of cool stuff, man.
That's interesting.
And I think you've got such a great point, and they've said that the novelization of the prequel trilogy, it gets fleshed out. It talks about Sidious. It talks about, what he really was trying to do. It talks about really who Ren was. And I think this is we get stuck up with these movies and what we see on film. But if you actually read the novelization of those films, it's way better. And there's more.
It comes across,
It does.
They literally explain that when he touches her, he finds a wall in her head.
Yeah.
That somebody put up. And that when he tries to break through, that's when they connect. It literally explains that in the novel, and it's totally lost in the film.
Okay,
See, I felt they did the same thing with the prequels. It's not to go back even further, but the novelization of the prequels did the same thing, where Anakin's fall was so much better done in the novelization, as was the understanding of the Force and Yoda, and part of why he was holding back in a lot of instances. I thought it was a fantastic. If only they could have done the movie the same way they did the novelization.
So let's just shift gears for a second. I know we've got some talking points to get to, but we're having a great conversation about the novelizations of the films, which by and large are my favorite Star Wars novels yet. Whether it's EU or canon, those by far are the best. And I really love the idea that the authors who are writing them are given access to these scripts, and it may not be final, right? So you're getting these elements of early script drafts or mid rewrites, and it just adds this whole extra level. And I don't know, the biggest one for me is like when Return of the Jedi, the biggest what the fuck moment in Return of the Jedi is when Obi-Wan is talking to Luke about a certain point of view. He very specifically tells Luke Skywalker that when you and your sister were born, you were separated because the Emperor knew that if Vader had children, they'd be a threat to him. So your sister was taken to Alderaan, and then Obi-Wan very specifically says, "And I took you to live with my brother on Tatooine." So
good point.
In one script draft, Owen Lars and Obi-Wan Kenobi are brothers. So when you keep that in the back of your mind, the next time you're watching A New Hope and Beru and Lars are staring at each other at the dinner table going, "That man's a crazy old wizard."
There's a scene, I just got to talk about this. There's a scene there, and if George Lucas didn't tell Alec Guinness what the whole friggin' show was about, right from the get-go, and I don't think that he did, because I don't think he kind of knew at the moment, but
entirely possible.
There's a scene when he said, when he's about to tell Luke about his father, and he takes a moment, he just takes this breath, and he kind of just gazes off into the distance, and it's like he's about to tell the lie.
Yeah.
And there's a piece of acting there that is like, oh yeah, that's why you hired Alec Guinness. Right there.
Yeah, for sure.
And for me, it's like, when I rewatch it as an adult, I'm like, that actor knows what's going on, and he's like, there's a moment there.
It's funny that Alec Guinness would did characterize his part in those movies as the worst acting that he's ever done.
Yeah, it's so strange.
Yeah.
Who's the more foolish, the fool or the fool who follows it?
Yeah. He was my gateway drug into the rest of his movies.
Yeah.
A Bridge Over River Kwai. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Some of the other standout moments in the novelizations, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. Well, I guess it's jumping ahead, and it's also jumping back because I'm going to the prequels for a second here. But, there's that moment in Attack of the Clones in the novelization where you're reading the Dooku's inner monologue when he's facing off Yoda, and he thinks that, I'm going to kick your ass. And then Yoda turns it on, and Dooku very quickly goes, "What the hell was I thinking?" Metaphorically speaking. Or the moment in Revenge of the Sith when, you almost, and I say almost because I don't really, but you almost feel sympathetic to Dooku as the leader of the Separatists, because right up until the moment where he's in the throne room with Chancellor Palpatine, he really thought he was doing the right thing by leading the Separatists. He actually thought that he was leading the galaxy to a new form of government, and he thought he was in the right up until Palpatine looked at Anakin and said, "Do it."
When he gives that speech to Obi-Wan, when he's got Obi-Wan prisoner, I bought it. I fully believed he was telling the truth right there.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, really, it's safe to say that the novelizations, have hit some really, really highs. And then there's been, some real misses. And, I'm not going to go deeply into them, but, misses for me, like Truce at Bakura was a bit of a dud. The whole New Jedi Order with the Yuuzhan Vong, to me, it was just Star Wars.
Oh my goodness.
Star Wars with the Borg.
Before the dark times, before the Yuuzhan Vong.
To me, it was, Star Wars trying to capitalize on the popularity of Trek at the time, which had arguably the biggest cinematic villain in the Borg, and they just wanted to do something like that, and they just did it. Instead of being cybernetic, they did it biologically.
I loved it.
Really?
It's kind of funny that Star Wars, which is famous for its movies, it still falls plague to the old adage, the book was better.
Yeah, interesting enough.
And on that for a second, I think that it points to the fact that as a storyteller, George Lucas is conceptually very, very strong. But in terms of the mechanics of storytelling, he has a lot of blind spots. And so in the hands of a professional writer, these stories come to life in a way that, you know, I think what we really see in the prequel trilogy, which is the only one that Lucas was, you know, directly involved with after the original trilogy, is we see some founder syndrome. We see a guy that just can't let go of his baby and let it, you know, become something bigger.
I think at that point too, because everybody was like, there was a huge hype train. Like as you're building towards the Phantom Menace, and he's turned the lights back on at Lucasfilm, and like, hey everybody, we're gonna go again, right? And so there's this hype train, and I feel like people were afraid to say no to him.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like people were like, we'll just let him do a puppet Yoda. It'll be okay. You got brown hair? No problem. That's fine. That's completely fine. Oh, you're going to pick that kid to act when this kid's clearly, no problem. It'll all work out. He's George Lucas.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem.
I think it's a provable, verifiable statement to say that he's an excellent tool builder, but he's not the best craftsman. Like, he doesn't use those tools as well as other people could or have.
I just think he gives into the lowest common denominator way too often. He's like, this is what the fans want, because he takes the noisy few, and he appeals to it. I mean, that's that Jar Jar Binks in a nutshell. We need to have another comic source, so he just went right to the Jar Jar Binks. He's a hack. Great universe he's built, but...
He did that for his kids. It's like his own children, and he like ran that by them, and they loved it for whatever reason. They might not have had very good senses of humor or whatever, but that's
but if you act like an idiot like Jar Jar Binks to your kids, they're gonna laugh. Doesn't mean it should be in a movie.
Well, no,
I will credit this, like the Jar Jar Binks voice and how he talks is the best way to piss anybody off immediately.
Well, that smells stinking.
Like, it's been an excellent tool in my tool belt for whenever I've needed to just no, you know what, you need to be pissed off now.
I love Bill Berg's. He uses some Gungan like slang or something, and he says like in a Jar Jar voice in The Mandalorian in that the 6th or 7th.
Oh,
episode.
That's right. Yeah. And it works very well.
Yeah.
So, has anybody actually tried to watch Resistance?
I tried
as well. I have stomached the first season when they pulled the Star Trek Deep Space Nine. They took the station and made it into a spaceship. Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay, we just jumped the shark.
I didn't really care about any of the characters at first. Now that I played the Squadrons and Major Von Reg as a character in that, I might go back and explore a little bit about her. But, and the animation, it just felt like, I don't know, something about that style of animation didn't appeal to me.
To me, that cell-shaded animation is, 10 to 15 years out of date. And
it felt old like that. That's exactly right.
Maybe you remember. Remember, this is a bit of a side for you, Hank, but do you remember the Robotech Battlecry video game?
Hell yeah.
So it reminds me of that. And in Battlecry, it worked fantastically. But now...
There's a Transformers game very similar to that.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
It's like that, yeah.
But I don't feel like it lends itself well to the style of stories that are typically Star Wars. And I guess I shouldn't say typical Star Wars, because Resistance kind of proves that there really isn't a typical Star Wars. You know, you have a cast of characters who are essentially racers.
And for me, when it was the only 3.75 stuff you could get in stores, I stopped. That's the actual only line that I never even got one of.
None of the Resistance stuff.
None of the Resistance. And not, it was like almost like a moral, I had to say, enough is enough. I have, look at all my Last Jedi figures.
Yeah.
I'm staring at 3 Poes right now. Anyway.
We're going to touch on merchandising later, and we can talk about sort of where we draw the line in the sand on collectibles, that's for sure. So that brings us arguably to what a lot of people would consider to be the best slice of Star Wars since Rogue One, and maybe even the best piece of Star Wars in the Disney era, and that is The Mandalorian. Season 1 is in the can. I personally have watched it 3 times now. Get season 2 that's dropping on the 30th of this month. I'm going to be there for episode 1 and every week until it's over, and I'll watch it for 17, 24, 50 times. What do we all think of The Mandalorian?
All you need to say about The Mandalorian is what it says constantly to itself. This is the way.
Yeah.
Like, this is how this franchise needs to move forward. These kinds of stories.
Isn't it funny, though, that they tried to do that in The Force Awakens when Max von Sydow says, maybe this will start to put things right? When he slips the map into Poe's hand, and everybody took it as the metaphor for we're going to right the wrongs of the prequels, and then they just didn't.
And I haven't done any research on this, but who is that Max von Sydow character?
Max von Sydow's character, oh my gosh, I can't.
Lor San Tekka.
It's never become...
Yeah, Lor San Tekka was supposed to be a survivor of Alderaan. So how he got the map, I have no idea.
There's comic stuff about it.
For sure,
it's not terribly interesting, but
okay.
The thing is that he's a priest in the Church of the Force, and that whole village. And you don't get this unless you read the novel. That whole village is members of this Church of the Force, which ties sort of back into what the Guardians of the Wills were doing on Jedi in Rogue One.
Yeah.
And that the idea that there are lay people that worship the Force.
See, sometimes
and like non-Force users that like are priests in the Force that can teach the Force, or like, you know, and then there's characters like Maz Kanata that seem to be, you know, of the Force. They have abilities, you know. So for me, it brings a broader picture.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like watching the sequel trilogy, and I know this is off topic, but I just want to make this point for a second, is that watching that sequel trilogy, I feel like what it must feel like if you watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy never having read the books. Because there's so many random references that are clearly part of some larger story, but it's not a story that's being told in these movies.
Yeah.
And now, because Lord of the Rings is an adaptation of a, you know, much larger work, you can sort of tolerate that. Most people come to it having read the book, but in what is predominantly and primarily a film franchise, I find that kind of thing frustrating. But anyway, what that ties around to is that's what I think is fantastic about a series like The Mandalorian, is that you have the time with a tightly focused storyline over a whole season.
Yep.
You have time to develop character. You have time to develop backstories. You have time to develop all of these things. You're not relying on these outside properties to be able to tell a quality story.
It's funny you say that too, Henry, because going back to this whole story group thing, we've seen it certainly with the EA license on the video games and the comic books, is that Star Wars is not just a movie franchise anymore. You can't just go, sorry, I shouldn't say that. You can go and watch a movie, or you can go and watch The Mandalorian, or you can go and watch Rebels or any of those other still canonized properties, and you can enjoy them for what they are. But they are going so far out of their way now to tie everything together there's stuff you're just not going to pick up on it if you haven't.
It's the Marvel Universe syndrome.
It really is.
I blame that on the Avengers.
Yeah.
Like you say, for me as a comic collector, that was always my favorite part of the Marvel Universe, was the crazy continuity.
Sure.
From like the 70s to the 90s when it was tight as hell. That was my favorite stuff. Like, because I knew that something that happened in issue 35 was going to, you know,
it mattered somewhere else.
That happened in issue 90, like,
sure.
So for me, Star Wars drawing on that or kind of going in that direction gives me like, it's more cohesive.
It rewards
I kind of like it.
You.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
it does.
right, somebody that's into everything, or right, it's a little nod to, hey, thanks for buying the comics. This one's for you.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. It's a like on Facebook, an extra endorphin.
Yeah.
Extra endorphin.
I'm getting that with Squadrons right now, and I don't want to spoil it for you, but there's an element of Squadrons that ties into the Star Wars Armada tabletop game, which really kind of threw me for a loop because the continuity that's established on the back of the model box does not jive with what's going on in the game. So I'm like, wait a minute, this is weird.
Super happy that it's set after Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, and Mandalorian after Return of the Jedi by I believe 5 years. I think is the where we're picking it up. So
right.
New Republic.
You could bump into Han Solo or Luke Skywalker at any moment. And that's just the potential, the idea that could happen is fantastic.
You have a
because
fledgling.
it doesn't need to happen.
No, you've
right?
got a fledgling New Republic, which now is established a seat of government on Chandrilla, and you have what we would refer to as the Imperial Remnant from the old EU days.
So wait, does that mean that Baby Yoda was born in between Phantom Menace and the Clone Wars?
Yeah,
he's 50,
he's 50 years old at the time of Mandalorian, so he's pre.
Phantom Menace is 35 BBY, right?
That's right.
And if that's what do we think? What's
so
6
he
years?
survived the Clone Wars, which is
Heck yeah, yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he was 20 years before the Clone Wars, probably 15 to 20 years.
What do we think of? Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
No, I was going to say, so he would have been born sometime around the Phantom Menace.
Yeah, give or take, yeah.
Yeah.
What do we think about the Mandalorian recanonizing or changing the context that Mandalorian is a way of life and not a species?
Well, I think something happened.
Yeah.
I think something happened, and that we're probably maybe to dive into that, but the idea that that's how they're moving forward. There's a few things
if they're going to bring in Mandalore himself.
There's a few things like the armorer's helmet.
Yeah.
The armorer's helmet has the spikes from the Maul.
That's right.
Followers.
Yeah. And so Eric,
Death Watch,
just
they're a subgroup of the Mandalorians, right?
To touch on to touch on the thing that you're talking about, Eric, are they gonna make reference to Mandalore? So I mean, if you do a deep dive on Rebels and back into the Clone Wars, then you know that the Darksaber was a unique lightsaber created by the first Mandalorian Jedi, right? And then culturally significant because I'm not sure where this comes from. I'm pretty sure it was discussed in Rebels, but there's some connection to whoever wields the Darksaber is Mandalore.
Correct.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. So technically Moff Gideon is Mandalore.
I thought it was the armor of Mandalore that made you Mandalore. Well, there's a special set of Mandalorian armor besides what everyone else wears that's like, this is Mandalore's armor.
See,
I may be remembering something from the Knights of the Old Republic.
That's
games.
entirely possible. I know that KOTOR really, really went deep on the whole Mandalorian Jedi War thing, and I didn't follow that very closely. I certainly didn't follow it when Dark Horse, I think, had the license. I think Dark Horse actually did quite a bit of stuff on that as well.
Exarchon and that stuff, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not as deep into the expanded universe as you guys are, but the KOTOR, was that the massively multiplayer, like the online role-playing
that's
game?
the Old Republic, which
Old
is
Republic.
based in that same time period, but
KOTOR is like D&D with Star Wars.
Yeah.
And is that the multiplayer online game, or is that...
It originally started as a...
It spawns the multiplayer online game.
It's a first person.
It's a turn-based RPG in the style of D&D.
Oh, okay. All right. Which then eventually would form the basis. The lore forms the basis for the game.
Exactly.
Right.
It's what spawned things like Darth Revan.
And they've canonized that. They've canonized Revan in
and to be honest,
Clone Wars.
One of the best twists in Star Wars history.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, I actually put the controller down.
That's right.
I put the controller down. I grabbed the side of my head, and I'm like, oh my God.
I do the same thing. Absolutely.
Yeah. When you take the mask off, I'm Revan. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Filthy.
While we're still on the subject of the Mandalorian, I just want to ask a couple more questions about that. The episode, The Gunfighter. So that's the episode where they go after Fennec Shan. And at the end of the episode, we get the clink of spurs and the
jangle.
Do we see a pair of boots? Anybody want to speculate on what we're getting from that?
Well, that jangle apparently is the same sound that is used in the Empire when Boba Fett's walking down the hall with Solo's body. Apparently, I haven't done any research myself.
So that is that rumor. That's the popular opinion, is that is a setup for the return of Boba Fett.
And so then after that, I watched the crap out of that scene, trying to pause it, zoom in on it, do whatever I could to see if I could find a shadow.
It doesn't give anything, does it?
Some of the stuff I have read about season 2, I don't know if people are on a blackout or not, but if anybody's read the Aftermath novels.
No. That's the Chuck Wendig ones, right?
Yeah, there's a little snippet in one of them about Cobb Vanth, and he in the novel, he buys a set of Mandalorian armor off Jawas, and Freetown is in Tatooine. It's on Tatooine. And Timothy Oliphant has been cast.
That's right.
And so there's a bunch of stuff going on there that I'm pretty excited about. So that's sort of the direction I think they're going to go, because the timeline is perfect.
I would say that's probably the same thing. And along with the other casting news, you have, like you say, Cobb Vanth, but you also have Tamura Morrison has been cast in an unnamed role. Well, I mean, there's only so many roles that he can fill. Well, so you know what? I'm thinking Rex and Boba Fett. There's no reason why he can't be doing multiple roles.
It's a true story. He did 10,000, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So, and Carlo Esposito, is he not one of the best on-screen villains you've seen in a while?
There's two great villains in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was it Werner Herzog?
Werner Herzog.
Yeah.
Man, both those guys kicked their roles right out of the park.
They really
amazing.
did.
This movie speaks to my soul.
Oh, I love his delivery when he steps to Din Djarin between. He's got the two weapons pointed at the two stormtroopers askew to him, and he steps right between the guns, right up to his face. I'm like, wow, that
takes a pair of pills.
Yeah, hell yeah.
So, The Mandalorian, I would say it's right up there with some of the best Star Wars since Rogue One, and I am completely in love with it, and will watch it until the end of days.
Thank you.
Any final thoughts on Mandalorian before we move on to games?
Hope they don't fuck it up.
Yeah.
Don't Game of Thrones it, boys.
I hope they don't fuck it up.
Yeah, and in terms of the tone, I mean, they basically mashed up a spaghetti western with
what if
Star
Sergio
Wars
Leone wrote fucking Star Wars?
For sure.
It's fantastic.
And it's perfect.
This is the way. I think this is going to be a two-parter, maybe.
We can definitely cut it up. There's no issue with doing that. We can cut it up.
Awesome.
Thanks for hanging out, Jay.
Fantastic conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for wanting to be a part of this.
Jay.
Hey, cheers.
Have a good night, my friend.
It was a lot of fun.
Have a good night. Hey, thanks for tuning in to the first episode of Star Wars here on Fandom Power. We had a lot to talk about, and the conversation will continue on part 2. Join us next time.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to Fandom Power. Be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Stay tuned for our next episode where we'll be talking about another one of your favorite fandoms. Fandom Power is a Sawcast production.